Representative Hardaway, you're recognized on House Bill 2795. And before we get started, a lot of people have traveled a long way to be here today, and we're going to go into recess at some point during the hearing today to hear from several speakers, but just be patient with us, and we'll try to work through this. You're recognized, Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and to all those citizens who thought enough to travel today in the interests of your children. Thank you.
Do we have a motion on the bill? We've got a motion. You recognize Mr. Hardaway.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 2795 actually came into being during the time that the public school system still required an assessment test as virtually an exit exam, or do or die, at the end of your school career, and it determined whether you were going to get a diploma or not. I thought that was wrong. Fortunately, we know that the department has seen fit, the board has seen fit to pull together the high school transition policy rule, and because of that, the tenor of my bill is going to change just a little. And we're not concerned so much now with the fact that we have an exit test on the public school systems, an exit test or proficiency test that the homeschoolers or independent school systems would have, and it would be a different test. Now I want to focus on what the impact would be, could be, on, because of the changes that the Board of Education, State Board of Education has made, what the impact could be in figuring that 25% tile of the GPA for these necessary courses, core subject matter, whether that's going to figure into making some of the public school children have to go through a different quantifying process for what their knowledge base is, and thus being able to get a degree, and thus being able to access higher ed, and thus being able to access higher ed scholarship money, grants, and loans. Because the bottom line is this: it's on how you're measured that determines what that measurement is. I've had the pleasure of speaking with several of the homeschool parents and students today and yesterday, and I want to make sure that I say that everyone was respectful, and all of my emails and phone calls have been respectful, and I thank you for that. And it is just indicative of what can happen when the dialogue begins. I'm the founder and visionary of the Memphis Academy of Health Sciences, which of course is the first public charter school to open its doors in the state of Tennessee. And I know what the anticipation and anxiety levels were from the traditional public educators on public charters. So there's a whole lot of sympathy with what your anxiety level is anytime there's legislation that comes to bear on the autonomy that you enjoy as homeschool parents. I appreciate that. What it does, Mr. Chairman, is allow us to be able to make use of best practices that the homeschoolers would be able to develop, proven out. We've got to have some kind of general way of measurement and actually collecting that data and bringing it into the public school system. But that's cheaper, and it makes a whole lot more sense than having to develop umpteen laboratory schools. We've already got it working, and I don't think there's anyone, educator, professional, amateur, or otherwise, that is going to be more creative in developing a program by which the children learn better than that first teacher, and that's the parent. So I want to allay any fears that the committee or the attendees may have that I'm out to get the homeschoolers or the independent schoolers. The impetus has changed as far as the bill itself, of course, because of the high school transition policy rule that has come down from the Tennessee State Board of Education. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to need more time to digest it and determine the impact. So I'm really at some point going to ask to roll this, but I do want to honor the fact that we've had the travelers, and at some point, if you go into recess, to be able to hear from them.
Sure. If you don't mind, we're going to go into recess now without objection and recognize Dr. S. David Carr. And Dr. Carr, if you don't mind, if you could come to the podium and tell us about your background and why you're here today, please. We appreciate the fact you've traveled a long distance to be with us today. Thank you.
I like Tennessee. So, Mr. Chairman and distinguished leadership of the House, and Mr. Hardaway, legislation that has the potential of interrupting freedom and creating alarm and concern to the citizens of Tennessee is worth taking the time and addressing the issue. And the issue is not about testing. The issue is about control. And the power to license is the power to control, because the testing is already done by these students, Christian schools, non-public schools, home schools, SAT, ACT, Iowa Basic Skills, all of the tests that you and I had when we were youth. They're already doing all of that. But the purpose is to test them, all non-public school students, and that test is going to be based upon the curriculum that's going to be required by the Tennessee Department of Education, which to me is a somewhat conflict of interest, not only to the state, but for sure a conflict of interest for non-public schools, because the whole purpose of these schools anyway is that they don't agree with some of the curriculum. But this bill will require them to do the curriculum and then be tested upon that curriculum, and then it's not the parent or the school that's responsible for the diploma, but rather the Department of Education. So the bill is about control, and I really feel like that it's in fact, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association referred to it as threatening legislation, and the worst legislation that's been in 23 years in the state of Tennessee for these homeschools and non-private schools. And then another organization referred to it as a dangerous bill. So I'm asking for your consideration. First of all, thank you for consideration that this bill, again, is not about testing but about control, and it really should be defeated. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Dr. Carr? You're recognized.
Could you tell us once again how many norm reference tests you use as part of your testing criteria?
Well, there's other groups here that would probably answer that better than I can, if that's permissible.
Well, I'd like to hear that, because the test that we are administering in the state of Tennessee, not everything is a norm reference test, and usually the norm reference tests are much more difficult as opposed to the criterion reference test. And so many of the people with whom I've come in contact with in the homeschooling movement are engaged in testing their children through use of the ACT and through the Iowa test, which is one of the basic norm reference tests that are used throughout the United States, the Stanford Achievement Test, and so forth. So I know that as a tool, most of the people that I know that are homeschoolers have very high standards of testing.
That is correct.
So,
if I may, I think Debbie Landers is here today, and she may be able to answer that question. Without objection, we'll continue in recess. And Dr. Carr, if you could I hate to ask you to hang around, if you could just
All right.
be available, please. Welcome to Nashville.
Thank you.
You're recognized. If you could just give us a short background of who you are and who you represent.
Yes, sir. I got started in homeschooling back in 1985. After that, my husband and I established a Category 4 church-related school. In 1996, I became the executive director for TANUS, which is the Tennessee Association of Non-Public Academic Schools. I represent an association and accrediting agency of approximately 60 schools across the state. A quarter of those schools are accredited. A quarter to one-half have homeschool programs. In our association, which is what I can speak for most of all, we implement the Stanford 10. All grades 2, 5, 7, and 9 in the Category 4 schools, the campus schools, are required to test. It is our recommendation that all homeschoolers every year are suggested to test with the Stanford 10.
Any follow-up? Okay. If you could give the committee a brief background on what the testing requirements are besides the Stanford 10, and what years in school are the children tested?
Grades 2, 5, 7, and 9. The Stanford 10. I would also like to remind everyone that there is a level playing ground that is out there when a child goes to graduate, and that is through the ACT test. That is what is normally used here in the South. And again, I agree with Dr. Carr, is that the one thing that we're concerned with is that any type of test that is mandated is going to drive the curriculum. So we are not interested in any testing that is going to be subject-specific or criterion referenced.
Any more questions for Ms. Landers? If not, we'll go back into session and
Thank you.
recognize Dr. Brown. Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here today. And Dr. Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to the bill sponsor, and to you, ladies and gentlemen, members of this committee. You know, after 16 years, I've been here quite a while, and this issue has come up over time. For the majority of us have been supportive of you and homeschooling. I, for one, have been, continue to be. And I wanted to say, you know, I got 3,000, I suspect, more calls. Some of you called me in my office on Sunday and on Saturdays right here because we work very hard here. I guess I am concerned about some of the responses, and I'm just a little disappointed. I think I understand what the bill sponsor is attempting to do. He's paralleling, he's attempting to show the unfairness for the majority of the students, not the minority, in relation to exit testing at the state of Tennessee. Now, he says he believes, I think, now that there have been some changes, and I want to go back into recess and hear from Mr. Obing, to hear about the reference that Representative Hardaway has made to some transition of something that they are doing. But one of the things that many of us have had concern about has been the exit test. It has been a shame. We have robbed students of their future when we have permitted them to walk across the stage, graduation stage, with a certificate in their hands rather than a diploma from the school system. Shame, shame on us. And so I would have never thought to have moved a piece of legislation to garner the attention like he did. I just sort of am one to just write direct. I go after it. And he has called to our attention one more time the disservice we do to young people in the state of Tennessee when we don't meet their educational needs. My statement to him was that the only concern I had was that I could not hire most of you to come out and teach in public schools. Maybe we could do something about the standing we have. So I don't think that you came into the hostile environment that you thought you were coming into. You exist because the majority of the members of this Tennessee General Assembly choose to pass the kinds of legislation that enhances and creates and support homeschooling. I have researched you over the years. By the way, since you're quoting credentials, I taught at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, 28 years. Prior to that, I spent my time as a social worker. I know the significance and importance of family and family life. And we see the impact of it every day when children have warm, wonderful, loving, giving families, the distinction it can make. And all you're saying is this is what you want for your children. I want that not just for your children, for all children. So no one wants to take what you have, and you believe you're giving to your children. And I think you demonstrate that when we see your test scores. So when somebody can show me your test scores and say they're down or they're superior to the ones we have, then I would want to call you in and start testing you. I just want to say that I understand what this sponsor is attempting to do, and I applaud him for doing it, but I am upset that we caused the kind of anxiety he did among you. Because any time one of us can get almost 3,000 more telephone calls and not to count the emails, then that means there's been a tremendous amount of anxiety. And you don't need that. So I'm glad to know that he came here to tell you the real essence of what he was attempting to do. And I'm pleased he told me, when was it? About yesterday or the day before. And I told him, well, I'm glad you told me, because your bill was not going to get a motion. And so that was why I moved it, because he needed the opportunity to stand before you. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Without objection, we're back into recess, and Dr. Opie, you're recognized.
Bruce Opie with the Tennessee Department of Education. I'll try to be as brief as I can. When this General Assembly passed the Education Improvement Act of 1992 along with the BEP, it also required that the department would develop a series of end-of-course tests, and we would also revamp, if you will, our testing program for the elementary grades. Before that, we used, or the state used, the Stanford Achievement Test. In an open bidding process, the elementary test began using the vendor McGraw-Hill, and it did start out as a norm reference test, or a test that was developed off of a national sample, because that was to feed the value-added system, which was also a part of the EIA, the TVAS system. In 1998, the State Board of Education finally approved a series of end-of-course tests. The Education Oversight Committee approved what they determined. They had 10 end-of-course tests, 3 of which they carved out and called gateway tests. These 3 gateway tests were Algebra 1, sophomore level English, and biology. The difference between the end-of-course test in American history and physics and some of the other courses was that for those 3 gateway tests, not only did you have to pass the course, the Algebra 1 course, you also had to pass the Algebra 1 test as a part of your graduation requirement. Just this year, the State Board of Education has looked at their whole assessment policy for high school and determined that instead of having the 3 gateway tests as separate and apart, and you have to pass both the test and the course, that we would go back with the 10 end-of-course tests and make a percentage of what a student scored on those tests as a part of their overall grade, and that would be the graduation requirements. No Child Left Behind forced us to change our elementary testing program from a norm-referenced program, which we had had in the past, to a criterion-based. And basically, a criterion-based test is one just like a teacher test. The teacher gives 2 weeks of content, of material, and then the students take a test based on what the teacher has developed. The criterion reference tests we transitioned to that because No Child Left Behind required that each state would develop tests based on not a national norming process, but their own state standards. The idea was to have that in place, but then use the NAEP, the National Assessment of Education Progress, administered at a national level, to take the pulse in each state to see how we were doing compared with other states. So that's the balance there. So that is a little bit of a background as to where we are right this minute. If I'm not mistaken, it's for this year's 7th graders that these new requirements will take place. We wouldn't drop this on students that are presently in high school because you don't change the rules of the game while they're in their high school career. So this will phase in for those that are in the 7th grade. So there will still be the end-of-course tests. They will be administered at the state level for all public schools, and Category 1 and Category 3 private schools that choose to participate, and those homeschool students that homeschool through their local education agencies as opposed to those that homeschool through the church-related. So is that...
Dr. Opie, for the record, you work for the
I'm sorry, I'm with the Tennessee Department of Education.
And Chairman Winningham, you have a question? Any more questions for Dr. Opie? I didn't mean to cut you off, Dr. Opie.
No problem, I'm through.
Sure. You recognize Dr. Brown.
Thank you. I guess I talked about having robbed those young people of their future who went through the process and they were not able to. And we've had many discussions, ladies and gentlemen, in this committee over and over about the gateway test and the problems that we had with it. And it seems that we're beginning to try to address that. But I think, though, what we ought to see and understand and appreciate is with the this past year, with some leadership from the governor, we were able to go in and put an infrastructure under what was the 7th, the 8th, and 9th grade. They also will have access to ACT, SAT types of resources that will follow them on through to the 12th grade, and that should assist us in overcoming some of the disparity that we have been finding within our school system. So we're enriching the educational system. And I suspect my goal and my prayer would be that the day will come when you will not want to homeschool. You will find a school system that you will, in Tennessee, that you will be very proud of, and that will counter anything anywhere in the nation. Because I believe that those of you in the Department of Education and this legislature, that is our mission and our goal, is to make sure that we bring to every citizen in the state of Tennessee quality education, because without that they cannot have a high quality life. Thank you.
And Dr. Brown, we thank you for sponsoring that legislation last year.
Thank you, Dr. Opie. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Without objection, Andrew Huffman is recognized. Thank you, Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the subcommittee. We're thankful for your willingness to hear from some of our voices today. I thank Representative Hardaway and all the members of the House for your service to the state and to its citizens. I'm a homeschooling father. I actually was on part of the first wave of what would now be called homeschooling when I graduated from high school back in the 1980s. It was sort of a one-room parental cooperative schoolhouse under the umbrella of the Tennessee Association of Christian Schools. and today my wife and I homeschool our children under the umbrella of the church-related school program. My contention, suggestion to the good members of this committee is that what's not broken doesn't need fixing, and even if there are elements of the other educational functions of this state besides homeschooling that need attention, and it certainly sounds from some of the comments we've heard today that there are things there that issues of equity and fairness that might need to be addressed in one way or another. The solution to that is not to penalize the homeschooling community, which, as has already been mentioned, is on average doing a very diligent and successful job of trying to educate the citizens and future voters and leaders of this state and this country. My wife and I have discovered, as we've been raising our children, that each individual child is unique. That's what came as a surprise to me, believe it or not. I thought with the same parents in the same house in the same environment, each one would end up looking a lot like the others and acting a lot like the others. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, we've discovered that each child requires, at least under the best circumstances we can determine for their education, requires a custom-made education. And we've been able to do that, to allow students that excel in one area to advance more quickly in that area, to provide students that need more help in certain areas, additional remedial time or focus on those areas in which they need help. And subject-oriented testing, gateway testing, would be disastrous for that kind of individually customized educational regime. It also giving parents, or recognizing, I should say, the liberty that we believe all families have to choose and customize and implement the curriculum and subject teaching that is most appropriate to their family and to the individual needs of their children, allows for a great deal of specialized focus that would otherwise be unavailable. And we're able to customize the curriculum and the educational experiences not only to the needs but to the special aptitudes and desired opportunities of each child. And so while I cannot complain about the what Representative Hardaway and Dr. Brown have expressed as some of the equity issues in the general public school system, we would heartily encourage you to vote no on this bill so as not to penalize the homeschool students and community and private school students who are not to blame for this problem. And if there are ways that we can all come together to help to achieve those other objectives in less harmful ways, I, for one, would certainly would welcome the opportunity to work in that regard.
Any questions for Mr. Huffman? If not, without objection, we're back into session. And to clarify the parliamentary situation, Dr. Brown made a motion on Representative Hardaway's bill. The bill has yet to receive a second. So that's the situation as we go forward. Any further questions on the bill? And you're recognized, Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Only a few comments. The first thing that I want to do, once again, is to assure our attendees that this is not the final language. I think the advantage of democracy is that it is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And the proof is sitting here today. The facts are that we have dialogue going in the room today. I've had the opportunity to speak to some of you by phone. Some of you I've had an opportunity to respond by email. And I had the occasion to speak with several in the halls before I came in. And it's that kind of dialogue that's going to be necessary to develop the kind of educational system for all of our children, because all these children have to, at some point, depend on each other as the future approaches. All of our children need the best educational opportunities that can be provided, whether it's through homeschooling or whether it's through the public schools or whether it's through independent or private schools. And I would suggest that this dialogue that has begun needs to be substituted going forward. This dialogue needs to be one of cooperation and trust and collaboration, as opposed to what I've heard in the past of competition and distrust. If we can take the opportunity that has been presented to us today to dialogue, look for the best practices that the homeschoolers, independent schoolers are doing. And I spoke with some of you earlier and told you to remember there are best practices from the public schools that you have taken into your teaching process. Let's work on these things together. Let's talk about whether the assessment tests that the public schools are doing and the assessment tests that the private schools and the homeschoolers are doing need to be the same. Whether there needs to be more of an opportunity for the private schoolers to have more options in testing. Whether the criteria versus norm testing needs to be an option for the private and the homeschoolers. The thing that I keep responding to most frequently in my conversations is that we don't want to test to the curriculum. And some of you I've shared with already words from my father, and that is, if you know the material, it doesn't matter what the test is. And that's how I was raised. I went to a public school. Of course, we had the public school curriculum. But every day that I went home, I may not have an assignment, but I always had homework. I may not have had an assignment every day, but I always had homework. And that's because my father's point of view was, unless you knew more than the teacher, you had homework. I took my books home every day. So my education foundation was a curriculum, but it was only a part of my education. And if you look at the system that you employ now, I'm sure you'll find that you are tested on everything just because well, let me correct that. You're not teaching just because you figure it's going to add to the overall value of your child's testing. There are things that you're putting in your child that they'll never have a formal test on, but they'll have that life's test. And that's the most serious test that you can have. So I would ask you all, once again, to rest assured, this is not final language. We're not going to be in competition. We want to have cooperation and collaboration. And with that in mind, Mr. Chairman, I would seek the second from your committee, and then I would roll the bill.
Representative Towns, you're recognized, I think, for a second.
Second motion.
Representative Winningham, you're recognized.
I assume you're going to recognize his role. I won't make any motion on it, but I would. You've talked to the crowd a great deal today, and I don't know what the language of the bill is. I don't know where you're going, actually. I'm trying to understand and follow you, but I would suggest that roll the bill or take it off notice, put it back on notice when you get the language that you want. You share it with the chairman and each member of this committee, a week or something prior to having it on the calendar. But you also give a copy to Dr. Carr, Mr. Huffman, so they can have it in advance as well. And enclose your phone number an email address so they can communicate with you on the thing and try to get the language worked out prior to it being back on the calendar. That's a request to you, Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, if I may.
You recognize.
And of course, I recognize the need to make sure that all of my friends are kept informed, and they'll be informed not only at the end, but I'll be communicating with all of them, not just with individuals, but everyone will be kept up to date on language, on the communications that I have with others, anything that I think is important. Because that's
my request to you is to communicate with them, and then when it's back on the calendar, we'll take it back up.
Chairman Winningham, I have to disagree with you on one thing.
You're not in a disagreeing position at this point in time.
Well, let me disagree with you on one thing, Chairman. I don't think it's necessary for me to share my phone number or email with them. Everyone has it.
I agree, and time is running out. Sure. Finance Committee is going to be in here in a minute, and we have several other bills. Representative Town wants to speak, and let's move along.
Mr. Towns, you're recognized.
Representative Hardaway, 3-week roll, is that good?
That's fine.
He didn't take it off notice. Did the chairman take it off notice?
No.
Not off notice.
No. What I'm saying, you can take it off notice, put it back on when you get ready. That way, it can be a 2-week, it can be a 3-week, it can be a 4-week. It's up to you.
What's your request?
Mr. Chairman, I would request that the bill be rolled for 3 weeks.
Okay. Without objection, the bill's rolled 3 weeks. And I just want to take the opportunity to say, of all the communication I've received, it's been pleasant, it's been positive, and it's been a positive reflection on the homeschool community, and I appreciate the response. And without objection,
Representative Coley.
Excuse me, you recognize Representative Coley.
And I would just like to remind Representative Hardaway they also have my email address and my telephone number and everybody at this committee. And I have enjoyed your correspondence as well. And I appreciate your diplomatic nature for this, Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, sir.
You recognize.
Mr. Hardaway, they also have mine. The only thing I'd like to say is I always encourage communication. We all encourage communication. All I can ask is that if this is prepared far enough in advance with enough of the correct information on it, it could save all of us and our secretaries considerable time and effort if it was done with enough forethought and communication. All I'm asking is that, hey, this is great. We've gotten where we need to be today. It's been rolled. But I would just say in the future, we need to really look when something is almost to the point of being disruptive to our schedules and our normal ability to carry on legislation.
You recognize Representative Towns.
Mr. Chairman, now, they have my phone number and my email as well. But now let me emphatically stress that doesn't bother me. All right, on some issues, that's what this democratic process is all about. People are going to weigh in, and it's a good thing sometimes. It tests us because we only have a few amount of resources and a few amount of hours to deal with it. But there are going to be other issues, the same thing, and I always welcome the opportunity to hear from the people at any point in time. But by the same token, when it comes to me voting, I'm going to vote on what I think is going to be the fairest thing for all, or the majority of the citizens that I'm trying to represent. But I say wear the email and wear the phones out. That's what it's all about. Wear it out.
The bill's rolled 3 weeks. And Representative Winningham, you're recognized on House Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.